NC pork, good for the plate, great for the state. Welcome into Bold North State Football Daily, your home for everything football here in the Bold North State on the North Carolina Sports Network. I am Mike Waddell, joined by David Glenn, and we're here, man. It is the 2025 football season, and Bold North State Football Daily, DG, is going to cover this year on NCSN everything from the Panthers to the college game, to the high school game. We might even throw in some Pop Warner football at some point during this campaign. But man, it is great to finally be to football season. I'm excited.
I'm excited too, Mike, and I'm excited not only about football season where we have all these topics that we're going to start exploring today, but you and I, year 3 of the North Carolina Sports Network, with a whole lot of folks, now a small army of folks helping to supplement the content that you and I do together, you and I do separately, coaches during football season and basketball season, other experts. I'm thrilled that we're in year 3 with the North Carolina Sports Network. And as you and I dive in today, a quick thank you to our viewers, listeners, readers, followers all across North Carolina and beyond, because just to give one quick example, our YouTube channel's subscriber number is now in the top 2% in the world. We do not expect to catch Taylor Swift and the rest in the top 1% necessarily, but it obviously takes a lot of work by us, but it doesn't matter unless it's responded to by the folks out there in viewerland, and we owe all of them a huge thanks as we kick off year 3.
When you look at this season coming up, we're going to talk some details about the Panthers, Carolina, NC State, Wake, Duke, all of the teams here in the Bold North State. We're going to talk about them during today's edition of Bold North State Football Daily. But man, what are you most excited about as you look into this crystal ball and try to figure out what we're going to be talking about come December?
I'd say the list begins with new coaches, meaning new head coaches. I mean, Bill Belichick is the head coach at the University of North Carolina. That's a 6-time head coach Super Bowl champion with the New England Patriots. That is new. That is different. That was called by ESPN, one of the most impactful, compelling storylines in the history of college football. And of course, it's front and center on our platform, the North Carolina Sports Network. But there's much more, whether it's Dave Canales with the Carolina Panthers being only in year 2, assumedly with a new and improved version of his young quarterback, Bryce Young, or it's back to college football. Manny Diaz is only in year 2 at Duke. It's Dowell Loggins in year 1 at App State. It's Blake Harrell. I know he was a part-time coach last year, but his first full year at East Carolina. And that theme continues. It's Tim Albin at the Charlotte program at the FCS level to go along with Bill Belichick and a Jake Dickert of Wake Forest. So we're about to dive into a lot of those topics, but that's really the starting point for why this year the gridiron headlines are even extra tasty here in the great state of North Carolina.
Well, there's no better place to start than in the Queen City at the top of the football totem pole here in North Carolina with the NFL's Carolina Panthers, and it's year 2 under head coach Dave Canales for the Panthers. What's your early read, David, on this team as quarterback Bryce Young, the number 1 overall selection in the 2023 NFL draft, steps into the 3rd year of his NFL existence?
Yeah, Mike, I'm always in favor of hope and a glass half full approach to the world in a lot of different ways, but I would also say that the only recommended view of the Carolina Panthers right now has to be one that combines hope for some improvement with a healthy dose of what I would call skepticism. Remember that this team was supposed to be one of the worst in the NFL in 2023, and it was. They went 2-15, and Frank Reich got fired as the head coach along the way. This team was expected to be one of the worst in the NFL in 2024, And it was. The Panthers went 5-12 under Dave Canales in year one of his tenure. They tied for last in the NFC South division. They gave up the most points in a single season, regular season, in the history of the NFL. The closest thing there was to a silver lining was that Bryce Young, that number one overall pick in the 2023 draft, was better in year two than he was in year one, although some of that improvement did come late in the season in some garbage time. This year, almost everyone thinks the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons will be better than the Panthers again, just in their own division. And whereas I do not see the Panthers projected this year as the worst team in the NFL, the way they were last year, I don't see anyone picking them as a playoff contender either. The main reason for my skepticism is really simple. How many great players do the Carolina Panthers have right now? They have Derek Brown on the defensive line for sure. Him missing almost all last season was like a death knell to that team. When healthy, he is an absolute difference-making monster. J.C. Horn at cornerback. He made the Pro Bowl last year. And although he had that freak hand injury in the preseason car accident this year, he is expected to be okay for the regular season opener. So that's two. Who's the Panthers' next best player? You might say it's an offensive lineman, maybe a Robert Hunt at guard. And if that group stays healthy, it could be one of the team's strengths this season. It might be a Chuba Hubbard at running back. I'm hoping it's going to be somebody like Trayvon Merrick, the safety they signed as a free agent. And we'll get to reasons for that later, the details of it. He is one of the team's newcomers that the team should be excited about. But to become a playoff team, you need more than one or two guys to be truly great. And I'm not sure the Carolina Panthers are quite there yet.
What do you see as the key factors for this team to take a leap up in the NFC South?
You know, as much focus as there's going to be on the quarterback, Bryce Young, and that Panthers offense, and understandably so, I wouldn't argue with that spotlight. I think if you're looking for at least the possibility of dramatic improvement, you have to look first at that defense, which again was dead last in the NFL in points allowed a year ago. It starts with a healthy Derek Brown on the defensive line and a healthy J.C. Horn at cornerback. But it will be fascinating to see how general manager Dan Morgan's offseason moves on defense will pan out, because there's at least the potential for a very large step up the ladder on that side of the ball. The Panthers play that 3-4 defense, right, with the four linebackers. Most of the guys that you will see on that three-man defensive line this year were not there during last year's disaster. Again, Brown is this 320-pound stud. He's back from his injury. He missed all but one game last year. So he's new in a different way. Guy named Bobby Brown III is a 330-pound free agent signee who has started for the Los Angeles Rams in each of the past two seasons. And a guy named Tershawn Wharton, not a huge guy, but he's a free agent signee and a quick athletic lineman who started for the Kansas City Chiefs last season and has a couple of Super Bowl rings from the years before that. The only guy back on the defensive line who was there last season is the big fella, A'Shawn Robinson, former Alabama star. That guy has started almost 100 games in his decade-long, at this point, career in the NFL. So if the Panthers want to go 300-plus pounds, 300-plus pounds, 300-plus pounds across those three spots on their 3-4 defense on the front line, they can. If they want the new guy Wharton in there for less size but more agility, they can do that. If they stay healthy, the Panthers' defensive line should be a lot better than it was last year. And whereas the Panthers' linebacker position is a little harder to predict, in my opinion, I'm excited to see former Pitt star Patrick Jones II, or maybe somebody else can have an impact there as an edge rusher. Jones was mostly a backup for Minnesota over these past 4 NFL seasons. We'll see if he can have a more prominent role with the Panthers. But I do think, however linebacker shakes out, there's a good chance that we're going to see secondary improvement to go with that new and improved defensive line. J.C. Horn, proven commodity at one corner. They like Mike Jackson, another veteran at the other corner. Corey Thornton, another corner, plays nickel, etc., was one of their preseason stars. Their record was ugly, obviously 0-3. But some guys made impacts, and Corey Thornton was one of them. And meanwhile, at safety, man, I love the style of play of another Panthers free agent signee, guy named Trayvon Merrick. This guy was a second-round draft pick of the Las Vegas Raiders 4 years ago, and he was the full-time starter for the Raiders at safety in each of the past 4 seasons. He hits hard. He loves to blitz, kind of hover near the line of scrimmage and make that quarterback think whether he's going to come at him or drop back into coverage. He has a really high football IQ. He covers well enough, and he got better every year during those 4 seasons with the Raiders. The other projected starter at safety, Nick Scott, was not great last season, but he's in his second year in the system now, and maybe he's going to be pushed by another Panthers newcomer, a draft pick in this case, fourth rounder out of Ohio State, guy named Lathan Ransom. So if you're better on the defensive line, which I think can happen, and you're better in the secondary, and again, I think both of those things will happen if the Panthers stay mostly healthy, well, then you're going to be a lot better than dead last in the NFL on defense. And if you're better on defense, you won't put Bryce Young and that offense in so many impossible situations, which was the case for the past 2 seasons. Bottom line, do I think the Panthers are a playoff team this year? I do not. Do I think they can improve on last year's 5-12 record? I do. And I guess that's just a reflection of the franchise's need and desire to just take baby steps in the right direction in year 2 under their head coach, Dave Canales.
It's football season, y'all. Tailgating 101 brought to you by the North Carolina Port Council. And Roy Lee, what are the essentials that you need for a great tailgate?
Well, rule number 1 for any tailgate is don't show up empty-handed, right? You know, if you forget your lawn chair, you can stand around. If you forget your cooler, maybe you can con a drink off somebody else. But you got to bring something to the tailgate. And what I recommend everybody bring,
Here it comes,
is bacon. Because bacon makes everything better. And you can use this throughout the day. So you got a breakfast tailgate, we're gonna make biscuits. You got a lunch tailgate, you can throw it in on a cheeseburger. Your team's not doing well on the field, you just have some bacon, and as again, bacon makes everything better. So wonderful opportunity. You can cook it in advance, bring it to the tailgate, throw it on there. It's awesome.
raising the bacon, raising the bar. The North Carolina Port Council gives you these Tailgate 101 tips all season long here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Need to move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, or away from North Carolina? Whether it's the Triangle, the Triad, or beyond, XL Moving and Storage is the company you can trust. Local, reliable, award-winning, and stress-free, XL's team handles every detail so you don't have to. Get your free quote today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com. And tell them David Glenn sent you.
Not only had there been a lot of changes with the coaches at the NFL level here in North Carolina, but also, man, right here in the state, Bill Belichick is at North Carolina. Jake Dickert, who you mentioned earlier, is at Wake Forest. Blake Harrell gets promoted as the interim head coach up to the head job at East Carolina. Tim Albin at Charlotte, working for AD Mike Hill, who really needs this one to work after the Biff Poggi experiment. And Dow Loggins, who has put together a great staff. Man, I am psyched up about the Mountaineers. Didn't like the fact that they made the change, but if you're going to make the change, go for broke, and they've certainly done that. Not only have they done that up at Boone, but David, they've broken ground on a brand new Tommy Sofield indoor facility, replacing the old 80-yard one with now a 100-yard one. But man, lots of change going on in the front offices, except in Durham and NC State. Out of these first-year head coaches, Carolina, East Carolina, Wake Forest, App State, and Charlotte, who's going to have the biggest year one in college football 2025?
I will answer this question with great caution, Mike, because I do not think that we have a sure thing type team in our state this year, certainly not among those 5 first-year head coaches. But my answer is the one guy who is not entirely new to his school, and that is Blake Harrell at East Carolina. I think we're going to see a lot of growing pains with those first-year head coaches all across the state, but I do think the Pirates have a legitimate shot to build on what they did last year after that mid-season transition from Mike Houston to Blake Harrell. It's important to remember that ECU went 5-1 under Coach Harrell last season, including that memorable bowl win over NC State, and that the offensive coordinator, John David Baker, and the starting quarterback, Caton Hauser, are both back, as is the Pirates' star wide receiver, or at least one of them last year, Anthony Smith. It is true that the Pirates got ransacked in the transfer portal. I mean, their wide receiver, Chase Sowell, is at Iowa State. Safety, Gavin Gibson, and defensive tackle, C.J. Mims, both off to Chapel Hill and playing for UNC. Linebacker Zakai Barker is at SMU, another ACC team. Cornerback Eric Fletcher is at Oklahoma State, and that list goes on. The Pirates were raided by Big Four teams out there. But they also added some talent from the portal as well. Wide receiver Jaquays Petaway from the Oklahoma Sooners is one. Guy from our backyard, Jordy Lowry, was one of the better players at Western Carolina. He's a cornerback. He's with the Pirates now. Jonathan Akins from Maryland, also with the Pirates now. Tyler Johnson from Penn State is another wide receiver that is part of the fold this year. So overall, my guess, and that's all it is an educated guess. My guess is that among those five first-year head coaches, ECU and Blake Harrell are going to be like some of those old Steve Logan coach teams in Greenville, exciting on offense but unpredictable on defense. To me, the bottom line is the continuity factor. With all those other coaches essentially building from scratch, right? New staffs, mostly new players, etc. The Pirates have a little bit of a twist on that because Blake Harrell was their defensive coordinator last year, was their head coach essentially for half a season with that interim tag that you mentioned. And now he's the real deal, the top guy, but that allows for a different level of continuity from those other schools. That, to me, makes ECU at least a solid bet to build on. Last year's overall record was 8-5. Maybe you get to a second straight bowl game. Having both NC State and BYU on the non-conference schedule this season is going to make it very difficult for the Pirates to do better than last year's 8-5 record. But out of all these first-year full-time head coaches, we'll say, since Harrell was only part-time last year, I do think that continuity factor gives him at least a little bit of a leg up, as a lot of these coaches, as you know, Mike, as a longtime athletic director, a lot of these brand new guys, they're not lying to us when they should say that they're not sure what to expect from their own players once these balls start flying for real.
Now, if you had to pick one of these coaches to make a big jump in 2026, 27, 28, who would it be? And I guess you can go ahead and say it's probably not going to be Belichick, because if he's here for 5 years until he's 78 years old, that brings up a whole other discussion. But who do you think is really positioned in the long run to have the best run as a new head coach here in North Carolina?
I do think if you're asking about 6, 8, or 10 years, it's one answer. But I think if you're asking about a 3 to 5 year window, I actually think the answer is Bill Belichick at North Carolina.
Wow.
Nobody else can say I'm a 6-time Super Bowl champion as a head coach. He had another 2 Super Bowl titles while an assistant coach in the NFL. There's a lot of really good recruiting being done by Bill Belichick in the class of 2026 and the class of 2027, where a couple of the best defensive linemen who are currently high school seniors in North Carolina have already committed to the Tar Heels. One of the best high school quarterbacks in the country, a young man from Georgia, has already committed to the Tar Heels. Top players from Alabama and Ohio and Michigan and other states have already committed to the Tar Heels. Now, again, those guys will not arrive until the 2026 season. But I do think, Mike, whereas App State and ECU, I think, and we've discussed it on other shows, are going to have a harder time than in the past keeping up with the Power 4 schools, just because we're in this brand new era where the ACC schools are going to be shelling out $20.5 million in revenue sharing to their athletes on campus, and about 13 or 14 million per year per school in the ACC and the other power leagues is going to football players. whereas App State and ECU and Charlotte simply do not have that kind of money to throw around. So when you look at the 3 and 5 years down the road, I think it's hard to be optimistic about ECU, App State, or Charlotte in terms of having a chance to upset Power Four programs the way especially ECU and App State have been able to do at times. The competition in their leagues, of course, will not be spending $20.5 million a year in revenue sharing, so that helps. But I do think the unique brand, what happened at Stanford with Bill Walsh many, many years ago, obviously a Super Bowl winning NFL head coach. The athletic director out there will tell you that whereas there were some great records and some not so great records under Bill Walsh, and that experiment did not last for an eternity, Stanford got some of the big wins that it was looking for, and it got a massive boost in the exposure of the Stanford football brand in a way that helped them in the longer term. And again, I'm not high on the Tar Heels in year one under Bill Belichick. I am not one of those people predicting, 9 or 10 wins. I do think over that 2, 3, 4, 5 year period, I think the Belichick factor, the Belichick brand, that 33rd NFL franchise tag that Belichick and his general manager, Mike Lombardi, have thrown around at times. It's not my speculation that it's going to attract a different level of recruit. It's not my speculation that it's going to put the Tar Heels on TV more often against high-profile opponents more often. All that stuff is already happening on the recruiting trail, and it's already happening in the form of UNC TCU this year on a Monday night when it's the only game being played in major college football. Next year, UNC and TCU in Dublin, Ireland, when it's going to be the only game being played in major college football that night. All these things are already happening. But again, winning on the field this year, I think, is a much bigger leap of faith. Winning on the field in the longer run, I do think Bill Belichick is the answer to that question.
It really is fascinating to me. I've been over at practice twice during the preseason for what you can see, which is about 10 minutes of watching people stretch from 50 yards away or catching balls off a jugs machine. And it seems like this team has a good spirit about them. But man, I got to tell you, the one guy that I just think just is never getting any of the press, he doesn't get any of the attention. And this year is going to be fascinating for me to watch what Manny Diaz does at Duke, because he has a good quarterback. He has a lot of returning players. They are going to lose some guys every now and then to the portal, but I really like the vibe around that program. State's going to state. And as you mentioned, I think with East Carolina and Appalachian State and with Charlotte, it's going to be more of a battle of attrition with resources. Wake Forest is also going to be very interesting because they're going to invest big money in football, at least big money compared to what you would think that they would have to go after. But with donors like Bob McCrary and also our good friend Ben Sutton out there, they're going to make a run at it too. And I was really impressed with the way that Dickert handled himself at ACC Kickoff in Charlotte. That guy has brought in some really cool guys, and maybe it's more of a can-do instead of a woe is me Eeyore mentality that we sometimes saw and we commented about a lot last year coming out of Dave Clawson. But I think Duke and Wake Forest, the ones that nobody would ever see coming, have a better shot, I think, in the long run, or even in the short run, than NC State and North Carolina. I think Carolina could be a bumpy road here in the first month of the season.
Yeah, you may be right, and we're going to get to our statewide power rankings a little bit later. I'll just give you some quick thoughts on some of those teams, and then we'll get to that huge week one schedule for the Atlantic Coast Conference that means so much to that league given its second-rate reputation on the gridiron. But at UNC, for example, in year one under Belichick, they have that, again, 33rd NFL franchise trademark that they're trying to throw around. Whereas the recruiting for next season is going well, with lots of those high-profile prospects wanting to play for the 6-time Super Bowl championship head coach. I'm not sure there's a lot of NFL caliber talent on Carolina's roster this year. In fact, right now, and this might surprise a lot of the people who are predicting 9 or 10 wins for the Tar Heels, there is one man on the entire 100-plus man UNC football roster who is projected as a 2026 NFL draft pick. Others may be projected further down the road to be NFL guys, but next year's NFL draft, one guy, senior quarterback Thaddeus Dixon. He's a transfer from the Washington Huskies. He was all Big Ten honorable mention last year in that league. He's the only guy to go at all in the 7th-round NFL draft next year. Two other guys on the NFL's radar, defensive end Bo Atkinson and linebacker Amari Campbell, they actually left UNC after going through spring practice with Bill Belichick, and they ended up at Ohio State and Penn State, respectively. They are on the NFL radar, but they're going to be playing for Big Ten teams this fall. I know the Tar Heels do have a manageable schedule, but I do not think they have special talent this season, so it's going to take a great coaching job by that legendary coach and his staff to get them anything better than, 7-5 and a mediocre bowl. And I think just getting to a bowl game should not be considered an automatic no-brainer. Do I think they will? Yes. Do I think people should assume it, given so many new players and such a lack of NFL caliber talent? I don't think people should assume anything. Carolina is one of the harder teams to predict in all of college football this year. And quick thoughts on Wake, App, and Charlotte, since we picked ECU as the most likely to win under their first-year head coach. At Wake, Jake Dickert, who did some really impressive things at Washington State, he's working with only 6 returning starters from Dave Clawson's 2024 Wake Forest team. And one of those is that superstar running back, Damon Claiborne. We saw him in Charlotte at the ACC kickoff event, and that's a great starting point for any team. But 6 returning starters is one of the lowest numbers among any of the 68 teams that comprise the Power 4 conferences plus Notre Dame. And that would be a first-year complication for any first-year coach, and it is going to be one for Jake Dickert. Quarterback play is one of the biggest question marks for the Demon Deacons as we're having this conversation heading into the 2025 season, and that is always a complication, if not a major red flag, in this case, for Wake Forest. At App State, there are a lot of unknowns, and maybe Dowell Loggins will be the correct answer to your first-year head coach success question. We'll see. But the Mountaineers' star quarterback of the last 2 years, Joey Aguilar, is going to be starting for the Tennessee Volunteers this fall. Their top edge rusher, Nate Johnson, is going to be at Missouri. The top offensive lineman, or one of them, Markel Samuel, he's at Oklahoma State. The top defensive tackle, Santana Hopper, is at Tulane, one of the favorites in the American Conference. That's a pretty big talent drain. Now, Coach Loggins does have a bunch of incoming transfers, and a lot of those guys are actually from Power 4 conference programs. So if his eye for talent and that of his assistant coaches is really, really good, maybe some of those Power 4 transfers can go from backups or little used players to stars for the Mountaineers. We'll see. Coach Loggins has a ton of NFL experience in his background, and he did some very good things as an assistant coach at the college level for the South Carolina Gamecocks in recent years. But I think a bowl should be the goal for the Mountaineers this season, and I do think that is a reachable goal in Boone, even as a James Madison and some others are the favorites in the Sun Belt Conference this year. And then finally, and we'll get to week 1 in that crazy ACC schedule, at Charlotte, the 49ers, under new head coach Tim Albin, who did some great things the past 3 years at Ohio University in the Mid-American Conference, they have the lowest percentage of returning production from last season in the entire American Conference. It's less than 40%. Just to give you some perspective, the Clemson Tigers of the ACC are returning 80% of last year's statistical production. The 49ers, less than 40%. That is dead last among the 14 programs in the American Conference. In his first year at Ohio, under similar circumstances, before he turned the Bobcats program around, Coach Albin went 3-9. So it usually does take, not always, but usually it does take at least a couple years to turn around a losing program. And that is a losing program, what Tim Albin inherited in Charlotte this past offseason. Hey folks, David Glenn here. Game day just got easier thanks to NC by Train. Whether you're headed to Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, or Greensboro, skip the traffic and enjoy the ride. You get free Wi-Fi, comfy seats, and direct access to top sports towns, all at great prices. Learn more at ncbytrain.org and travel smarter to your next game. NC by Train. Go Connect.
Okay, I've been involved with a lot of bowl teams. It doesn't take much to be a bowl team anymore. You have to be 500. This year, 94 teams out of the 136 competing at the FBS level will make a bowl game. I mean, the fact that you get a bonus to go to a bowl game, if that's the lowest bar that you've got, it's a very low bar right now just to make a bowl game. I mean, App State last year, made a change with a coach who had been to bowl games, who had a winning record, but it wasn't good enough. I think you hit on something, and we'll hit on this throughout the year. It'll be one of those stories that we follow, is that what is the attrition like at a place like App State, Charlotte, and East Carolina? And do they truly have a chance to compete outside of hoping that 00 is going to hit on the green spot on the roulette wheel and they get a chance to make the college football playoff? I think that's a tough one. Now, DG, this week we're in week 0. This show is coming out on Saturday of week 0. The only game in the Bold North State is Methodist against Lewisburg, and we'll have coverage right here on the North Carolina Sports Network between the Monarchs and the Hurricanes. This could be a lot of fun because Lewisburg's a JUCO, and they play a lot of guys who are being parked there by some Big Four teams. We'll have more about that in the coming weeks. But week 1 in the Atlantic Coast Conference, man, if you are the commissioner of the ACC, Jim Phillips, you've got to be excited, but maybe a little bit apprehensive because your brand is truly on trial in week 1. And being an attorney, I know this plays right into your strengths of sizing up the strengths and the weaknesses for these ACC programs in week 1.
There is a 5-day stretch. So the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, where college football games are being played on all 5 days. Some of them, only a few games, or in one case, only one game is being played. And in all 5 cases, all 5 of those days, the ACC is either going to be in a minor spotlight or the biggest spotlight of all. And here's what I mean. Thursday would be of greater interest to our state rather than the entire country. Thursday's schedule does include ECU at NC State. That's on the ACC network. That crazy ending to the bowl game last year where the Pirates beat the Wolfpack, Dave Doran shared with us in Charlotte. That was one of the most embarrassing moments of his coaching career. Not losing the game, but the skirmish and the blood on the field at the end. Obviously, when those two get together, it's a lot of fun whether the game is in Greenville or in Raleigh. But for our state's purposes, Thursday will be a nice warm-up, 7 o'clock ACC network. This one's Carter Finley Stadium. The Wolfpack's a 12-point favorite, the last I saw in that. But when it comes to Jim Phillips, the commissioner, obviously it doesn't hurt the league's image if the Wolfpack beats the Pirates, as they're expected to do. But far more important is that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday stretch. Because on Friday, and this is the first of 4 straight days where truly the national spotlight's brightest lights are on the Atlantic Coast Conference, at least in part. Friday night, it's Georgia Tech at Colorado, 8 o'clock, ESPN. This is primetime Deion Sanders, right? And Brent Key, the head coach at Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets are actually a slight favorite in this game. Remember, Georgia Tech has its veteran quarterback returning in Haynes King. Colorado has sent Shadur Sanders of the Buffaloes onto the NFL, and that's one of the reasons the Yellow Jackets are the slight favorite. But in that 8 o'clock time slot on Friday night of Labor Day weekend, there's only one other Power 4 game going on at the same time. So the Yellow Jackets will be asked to carry the ACC flag with a victory in that one. Saturday, you know this as an athletic director, Mike, I have to remind fans of this. The expectations for a TV audience are highest when a game is on free network TV. What do I mean by that? NBC proper, CBS proper, ABC proper, Fox proper, right? They're not part of your, they can be part of your cable or satellite or streaming package, but they're free to everybody. That means 100 million plus TV households in the United States have access to those channels. we're living in a world where if a game is even on something as powerful as ESPN, which is the number one sports cable channel, the numbers of households that get ESPN is a lot less than it used to be. It used to be over 100 million. Now it's, last I saw, 60 something million. That's a massive reduction, right? And we do have ESPN Plus now and other things that reduce the impact of that decline a little bit. But the point I'm getting to is on Saturday, so you got Georgia Tech and Colorado Friday night. On Saturday on ABC proper, again, these are the brightest spotlight TV games of all. It's an ACC-focused triple header. At noon on ABC, it's Syracuse against number 24 Tennessee in Atlanta. At 3:30 on ABC again, it's Alabama at Florida State. On ABC in the nighttime slot, prime time, it's number 9 LSU at number 4 Clemson. So, who's favored changes from game to game. Tennessee will be favored over Syracuse. Alabama will be favored at Florida State. But those Clemson Tigers will be favored over those LSU Tigers. More importantly, for exposure purposes, it's back-to-back-to-back ACC teams in games. In all three cases, in this example, the SEC is the opponent. But that's an ABC triple header on network television on Saturday, August 30th. The ACC needs to upgrade its brand. The ACC needs to show it can attract more TV eyeballs for various purposes down the road. And the ACC needs to avoid a negative narrative after these week 1 games. Saturday's performances in that triple header will go a long way to answering those questions. On Sunday, there are no FBS games except for the 2 involving the ACC. So you can't ask, remember the NFL hasn't started yet its regular season on August 31st. So that Sunday, there's no NFL distractions and there's no college football distractions, at least at the FBS level. Virginia Tech plays South Carolina in Atlanta on ESPN, 3 o'clock game. Notre Dame visits the Miami Hurricanes at 7:30 on ABC. So again, the most prominent cable sports channel, ESPN, carries Gamecocks Hokies. One of the prominent free network TV channels, ABC, carries the Fighting Irish's visit to the Miami Hurricanes. And then on Monday night, it's the same deal. No NFL yet. That regular season doesn't start until the following weekend, but it's TCU at UNC. It's the debut of the legendary coach Bill Belichick in Chapel Hill, where his dad was once an assistant coach. It's on ESPN at 8 o'clock. There are no NFL games to distract the football-loving public. There are no other FBS games in the entirety of that day. TCU at UNC, 8 o'clock. Carolina needs to embrace the spotlight. The ACC needs to embrace the spotlight. And that's a 5-day stretch, starting with ECU at NC State, ending with TCU at UNC. Those 2 games, of course, right here in our backyard. That 5-day stretch, and especially the 4 straight days of national spotlight games on the biggest and bestest channels, it is as important as it gets for ACC football, even though it's only week 1. Those are big-time opponents. Those are big-time channels, and there will be big-time expectations for those games to deliver big ratings, but also from Jim Phillips' perspective as the ACC commissioner, for the ACC to get off on the right foot during this football season. Hey y'all, David Glenn here from the North Carolina Sports Network. When I'm in Wrightsville Beach, my go-to hangout is Jimmy's, the best local bar for sports fans, live music, cold drinks, and coastal vibes. No matter your favorite team, Jimmy's Bar is the place that sports fans from all across the Carolinas can call their home away from home. The next time you visit Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach, tell them DG sent you.
So who's your week 1 ACC big win and who's your ACC week 1 big dog?
Any conference in any sport is not viewed primarily as how good are you from top to bottom. A league is viewed primarily from the top down. In other words, most fans, most writers, most TV executives don't care nearly as much about your 18th or 17th or 16th or 15th or 14th team. Some years your bottom is okay. Sometimes, some years your bottom is just filled with horrible teams. It just doesn't matter as much. The ACC big win of the weekend, I think, will be the Clemson Tigers over the LSU Tigers. I believe Clemson has a chance to go 8-0 in the conference this year. I believe Clemson will be in that ACC title game in Charlotte in early December, as the Tigers usually are under Dabo Swinney. I believe the Tigers are the prohibitive favorite to win the Atlantic Coast Conference. The Tigers, by the way, are a 4-point favorite the last I saw over LSU, but it won't be easy, right? I mean, Brian Kelly's a good coach at LSU. He has a lot of good players at LSU. But Clemson, that game, a lot of these games we're talking about are neutral site. I've mentioned Atlanta a few times. This is a true home game for the Clemson Tigers. They have Cade Klubnik at quarterback. They have Antonio Williams at wide receiver. They have TJ Parker on the defensive line. They have NFL players all over the place, a lot of returning starters, and that 80% returning production number that is number one out of 130 plus FBS football teams this year. So I think the big winner will be the Clemson Tigers. And I shudder to think how the ACC would be perceived if the team that's expected to win the conference would lose at home as the favorite to LSU. That is not a scenario that Jim Phillips wants to even think about. But it's hard to think of what would be a bigger win than Clemson over LSU, in part, again, because whereas some of these ACC teams, Georgia Tech's playing an unranked Colorado squad. Syracuse is playing a borderline top 25 opponent in Tennessee. Miami is playing number 6 Notre Dame. That would be a huge win. But I think the biggest win would be Clemson over LSU, and my prediction is that the biggest win will be Clemson over LSU. In terms of when you say dog, I assume you mean someone is not going to show out.
Curb stomped. Who's going to get curb stomped?
Curb stomped. I do not like Syracuse against Tennessee in Atlanta in that Saturday afternoon game on ABC. Remember that whereas I do believe Fran Brown is a heck of a head coach, and remember that whereas the Orange did post a double-digit victory total in year one under Fran Brown just last year, to his eternal credit. I mean, that was one of the best storylines in the entire ACC a year ago. They lost Kyle McCord, their star quarterback, and I believed, we talked about it on our shows all season long, I thought Kyle McCord was one of the best players in this league at any position for how well he played for the Orange in his one and only season wearing that uniform after those years at Ohio State. He was brilliant at the most important position on the field, and I think Syracuse is going to be knocked down the ladder a little bit. I think Tennessee is pretty darn good, including with the App State transfer, Joey Aguilar, at quarterback for the Volunteers nowadays. By the way, former Duke Star Thomas, got to pause between that, former Duke Star, his first name, he goes by Star Thomas, brilliant running back for the Blue Devils. You might have an App State transfer starting at quarterback for Tennessee and a Duke transfer starting at running back for Tennessee. The SEC is really good at poaching the best players from other teams and other leagues, including those in the ACC. But yeah, I don't like Syracuse's chances against Tennessee. I don't like Florida State to beat a top 10 Alabama team. And I don't like, although I think the Tar Heels have a shot against ECU, I don't like the Tar Heels to beat TCU. I just think they have too many new players, too much uncertainty at quarterback. And Sonny Dykes has had, an average of about 9 wins in his 3 or 4 years at TCU. The Horned Frogs are a 3-point favorite in Chapel Hill over the Tar Heels. I will not be in shock if Carolina beats TCU, the way I would be in shock if Syracuse beat Tennessee. But I think we have more underdogs than favorites in all these highlight games for the Atlantic Coast Conference as a whole. And I don't know if I don't see a huge upset. The only two that would qualify as huge upsets, according to Las Vegas, would be if Syracuse beat Tennessee or Florida State beat Alabama. And I just do not see either one of those happening.
But I got to come back. I didn't get a pick from you, or at least I didn't hear it. So I want to make sure I get you on the record right here. Who's going to win that game at Carter Finley Stadium between the Wolfpack and the Pirates? Do you have eternal faith that NC State will show up in 2025 at the beginning of the year instead of having that NASDAQ up, down, up, down, up, down, they do their Wolfpack thing over the course of yet another campaign.
Yeah, I believe the Wolfpack is the better team this year, and I believe the Wolfpack will win that game. They are at home. They do have CJ Bailey, who got kind of his feet wet as the starting quarterback last year, almost in an emergency situation. So they're not starting from scratch at the most important position on the field. Remember that ECU, whereas they do have a lot of weapons on offense, they have a lot of questions on defense. So I think it'll be a great opportunity for NC State's offense to regain some confidence. But just in terms of just overall proven players, whereas NC State did lose a bunch to the transfer portal, man, the Wolfpack has several really good players. They're going to be starting in the SEC instead of in the Wolfpack's colors this year. But with Bailey back at quarterback, with guys like we talked to him in Charlotte, Caden Fordham at linebacker, Sean Brown at linebacker. I think that's a nice 1-2 punch in the front seven on defense for the Wolfpack. They're usually strong at the line of scrimmage. I just think we're going to see a more convincing win for the Wolfpack over the Pirates than that wild and woolly ECU victory in the bowl game. What was that, 8 months ago now?
All right. So we've saved the best for last here on our first edition of Bold North State Football Daily with David Glenn and myself, Mike Waddell, here on the North Carolina Sports Network. The dawn of the 2025 season is upon us. And DG, we're going to go back to that great basketball tournament that used to be played in early December in Greensboro, where they had the Big Four. Who are your Big Four teams out of the 7 bowl subdivision squads in the Bold North State? Who are going to be the best 4 teams, not only at the beginning of the season, but more importantly, at the end of the campaign?
Well, let me start at the top, and I'll answer that part of the question with a sentence that I have not uttered very often over the 37 or whatever the number is now years that I've covered college football in what you love to call the Bold North State. This year in this state, I think Duke football will set the standard. I do think others have a chance to be good, including the Tar Heels and the Wolfpack, who would make my top 3 in answer to your question. But I think the Devils will be good, and there are a lot of reasons I believe that. For the record, I do not believe Duke is quite good enough to, let's say, play in the ACC football championship game. But I do think that the Blue Devils have a legitimate chance to match last year's 9-3 regular season record. And that's not easy to do in Durham. Remember when Manny Diaz in year 1 a year ago won 9 games? That was the second highest win total in the history of Duke football. So suggesting that they have a chance to go 9-3 again in the regular season, that's a pretty big leap of faith. After Duke, I do think NC State and Carolina, in whatever order you can are going to fight for second and third place in our mythical statewide standings. I think App State and ECU are going to fight for 5th and 6th place. And among our 7 FBS teams, as you described it, I do think Charlotte's going to have a hard time rising too far from the bottom of that ladder this season.
That's a wrap on this week 0 edition of Bold North State Football Daily. It's going to be a great 2025 season right here, talking ball on the North Carolina Sports Network.
This has been Bold North State Football Daily, an exclusive presentation of the North Carolina Sports Network. Make sure you follow us on social media at the NC Sportsnet, and check out our website that is wall-to-wall coverage of North Carolina sports at ncsportsnetwork.com. Our foundational partner is the North Carolina Pork Council, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Telling the stories of the Bold North State. This is the North Carolina Sports Network.